Without further ado, the floor is yours.
Great. Okay. So, hi, my name is Devon Horn. Thank you all for coming to my thesis presentation of Atlantis, the Lost Empire. I want to extend an extra thank you to all of my fantastic mentors who've come to watch today. I have been so fortunate in my life to have such great teachers, and I would not have gotten where I am today or have been able to take on this behemoth of a project without all of your support and advice. So almost a year ago, when I was choosing a project to finish off my graduate education, we were in the middle of the pandemic and I felt myself lacking inspiration, starved for adventure, and seeking comfort. So I went back to the movies I loved growing up. And one of these films was Disney's animated Atlantis, and inspiration struck. One of the aspects that excited me about this project was the challenge of turning this epic animated adventure tale into a performance for the stage. With any adaptation, there's this line of being inspired by the original work, but also updating and bringing in your own artistic vision. So I was very inspired, obviously, by the original film, but I wanted to expand upon the Atlantean society in my reworked version for stage. In order to capture the sort of sense of wonder and to facilitate all of the action in this like very epic tale, I modified the script and decided to incorporate circus arts into my storytelling in the style of Looking Glass Theater or Cirque du Soleil. This project let me combine my love of theatrical excess, science fiction, historical and cultural research, fantasy world building, sculpture, and even marine biology. It's been a delight to dive in over the past months, and I think it's a fantastic representation of the wide range of skills that I pride myself in as a designer. So, Atlantis follows Milo Thatch and a diverse crew of explorers on their journey to discover the sunken city of Atlantis. We begin at the museum where Milo seeks funding for his mission, finally finding a benefactor and a crew. The group journeys along the seafloor and enters the Mariana Trench, where they are attacked by a sea monster and the submarine crashes. They land in a deep sea volcanic basin, which supports a surprising amount of life, including the lost city of Atlantis, where they discover a living, thriving society, which is very unexpected since Plato places the sinking of Atlantis at around 1400 BCE, but the society has survived this whole time and been living and thriving under the ocean floor. So Milo forms a bond with Kida, the daughter of the king, who shows them the city and tells them about its history and its power source, the heart of Atlantis. The heart bonds with the ruler of Atlantis when the city is under threat in order to protect its people. And sensing a threat within the newcomers, it ends up binding with Kida. But before she is able to activate the city's defenses, Rourke, the captain of the expedition, kidnaps Kida and murders the king in order to use the heart as a weapon of war. A battle ensues, but Kida manages to escape and save the city from the threat. So this story at its core is a classic tale of two worlds colliding. The world of the explorers is an industrial pre-World War I London, where industry is rising and academia organizes the world into clean little boxes. I was inspired by the unique cultural moment from the turn of the century to the First World War, where industry and futurism clashed so beautifully with Art Nouveau and the aesthetic movement. I wanted to explore this contrast in my work to highlight the lush richness of Atlantis, but still feel as if this culture had a basis in the era to kind of tie them together. So for the museum, where Milo works before he begins the expedition, I took inspiration from the London Natural History Museum, which has this incredible mixture of ancient feeling architecture and more modern industrial metalwork. The feeling of dark academia pervades the setting, and to continue that, I kept the color palette in these subdued sepias, but with high contrast and pattern to capture the dark graphic quality of the futurist art and also the Mike Magnolic graphic art that inspired the original animation. The submarine journey takes us into the deep, following closely to the plot of Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, which inspired this tale and was also one of my favorite books growing up. So I conceptualized that this new discovery that Milo makes for Atlantis's location would take them through the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest point in the ocean floor. And it sits just east of modern-day Guam. Deep sea volcanic plumes in the trench form an entry point into this magical city. So the world is strange and alien and in stark contrast with the heavy architecture of the world above. And there's also this repeated element of bioluminescence within the Atlanteans, which symbolizes the connection to the heart of Atlantis, their power source. And I base the color and sort of the concept for that on these deep sea creatures as well. The deep ocean was almost completely undiscovered in 1914. And even today, we've explored more of the surface of the moon than the deep seas of our own planet. The incredible creatures that lurk in the deep and sort of the mystery of what has yet to be discovered has been a source of fascination for me my entire life. So I was really excited to get to incorporate that in with my design. The vibrancy of color, unique patterns, and fluid lines of deep sea creatures formed a jumping off point for my vision of Atlantis. Atlantean culture, as I've mentioned, would have left the surface around 1400 BC. So as their culture advanced, it's only logical that they would have taken design inspiration from what they had around us, being the creatures of the deep. Biomimicry, which is designing materials and systems that mimic those found in nature, is something that I think the Atlanteans would really incorporate as a society. And it's actually very common in the natural world as well, where animals will mimic other more poisonous animals to scare off predators and the like. And in modern society, we frequently study structures from the natural world in order to advance our own technology and materials. So I think that this element really showcases Atlantis's advancement as a society, but also their symbiotic relationship with their environment. So I hope to capture the texture and organic forms of these creatures in Atlantean dress through pleating, weaving, and painting the textiles that they wear. Before sinking beneath the surface, in this new location at the Mariana Trench, Atlantis would have traded with ancient cultures around the Pacific Rim, such as the Dong Son in ancient Vietnam, Yeoman, Japan, and especially early Polynesian seafaring cultures, which evolved into the Maori and the tribes of Papua New Guinea. I wanted Atlantis to feel as if it had touchstones in these cultures, but had progressed and advanced as a society in the thousands of years that they had been isolated. So I took inspiration from these cultures in terms of textiles, ornamentation of the body, and weaving techniques, but I pulled from more modern artisans from the same regions to see how these traditions have progressed through time. I imagined a textile culture heavily centered around weaving, but pulling from the flora and fauna that would have been available in the deep sea. I found artists such as Jasmine Lingdon and Diana Scherer, who are creating textiles and weavings from seaweed and also growing them from the roots of plants. And I also pulled from the abstract asymmetric woven pieces of artists like Chris Warren and Amir Kaplan. These woven pieces combine with the fluid flowing fabrics that are reminiscent of the sea life and sort of the exoticism of the Art Nouveau works by artists such as Alphonse Mucha and Leon Basque. And that the combination of all of these elements creates the cultural dress of Atlantis. So for the setting of the show, I chose the Dolby Theater since it has the massive stage space to stand up to the epic feeling of the piece, and because it's already rigged appropriately for circus performances. So I made things easy on myself. I decided to bring the stage forward in a thrust in order to allow aerial acts above the audience to connect to the action on stage and to give more dynamic playing space. I was also really excited by the cycloidal design of the space as a jumping off point for my scenic concept. So I used the archway structure of the Dolby to my advantage for the show portal, which really needs to work for all three settings, the museum, the submarine, and Atlantis. And I pulled architectural inspiration from Art Nouveau for the proscenium arch. I love the combination of heavy stonework with delicate metal that's so iconic to this era, so I really wanted to include that. The mosaic at the top tells the story of the city of Atlantis being protected by their power source, the heart of Atlantis, which can be, the mosaic can be activated via projection mapping at the start of the show to bring in some movement to that and to tell the story. Also, every good fantasy book starts with a map in my experience. So I wanted my show curtain to set the stage in the same way. When the audience enters, they know that they're going to be going on an adventure. And it also serves as a storytelling device for Milo, who opens our show by telling the story of Atlantis sinking beneath the waves. And he continues to outline his discovery that Atlantis is, in fact, in the Pacific Ocean, not the Atlantic. So he's made this discovery and he's pitching his proposal to find the lost city to the audience as if they're going to fund the expedition. Milo is an adorable, eager young linguist who has been obsessed with finding a lost civilization his entire life. He works at the museum and he's desperately trying to get funding for this expedition. So I've put him in a somewhat classic sort of studious ensemble, not too polished, but still very era appropriate. His jacket is slightly oversized to emphasize his youth and haplessness, and I've brought in this lovely plaid for texture. He's in the sepia tones that the rest of the museum folk all are in, but he has this pop of blue in his vest and tie, which is a repeated element for all of the explorers. Milo's presentation is interrupted by the phone ringing, and we light up on Milo's office, which is a crowded little space in the boiler room of the museum. The museum director is calling to inform him that his proposal has been rejected. These offices are both sort of diorama style, and they would be lit up behind a scrim so that they don't take up much physical stage space, and they can fade away when they're unlit. The museum director is a stodgy old man in a classic frock coat, and I brought in a pop of red on his vest just to draw the eye to him on stage, and also to indicate that he's at odds with the expedition, so we have a little bit of contrast between him and Milo. So Milo rushes out onto the museum to try and confront the director, and he has to kind of fight his way through patrons. For this museum set, I was inspired by the London Natural History Museum, as I've mentioned. And in the 1910s, I noticed that they had a tendency to have these massive displays of archaeological specimens all on display at once in these symmetrical rows. I also was very inspired by the illustrations of Ernst Haeckel, which show biological specimens laid out and organized in a very static, symmetrical manner similarly. And those were being produced around this era as well. So I wanted to highlight the tendency of Western museums to take items from cultures and creatures from the ocean and pin them up and claim them as their own, because that theme of cultural commodification is deeply entwined in this story. So I've designed this huge glass specimen wall that takes up the whole museum space and has lots of biological samples all pinned up, but has a very subdued color palette. The museum patrons walking around in the background were really my chance to set the period clothing-wise and to scream, hello, this is 1914. So I wanted them all to feel extremely stuffy and rather wealthy. There are people who have free time on a weekday to walk around a museum. So they're all a little bit older and they have very classic shapes for the teens. To bring in the graphic quality that I had mentioned, I brought in these high contrast sepia tone prints, and there's no pops of color whatsoever among these background people. At the museum, Milo runs into Helga Sinclair, who is a mysterious and sort of sultry figure who stands out from the crowd. I found this absolutely glorious Paul Perret opera coat for her, which I feel like really captures the heavy contrast and graphic quality I wanted in the scene, but also has her stand out because the pattern is so large and the fact that she's completely overdressed for the museum, which I think adds to her allure and is perfect for this character. I paired it with a beautiful fox fur collar and cuffs, bringing in a touch of red as a subtle hint that she actually becomes one of the villains later in the show. So Helga runs into Milo and introduces him to her employer, Thaddeus Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore is an old friend of Milo's grandfather and is an eccentric millionaire. I was inspired by real world millionaires of the time, like Andrew Carnegie, but I really wanted him to stand out from the crowd and read as very out there. So when I found this amazing photograph of dress kilts from 1914, I decided to go full Scottish and give him that entire head to toe ensemble. His kilt is this blue and brown tartan, which becomes the color scheme for the explorer's uniform later. And I've brought in the blue piping for an extra highlight. So Mr. Whitmore has heard of Milo's discovery and has put together a crew and agreed to fund the expedition. As he's speaking to Milo about the crew, they come out one by one and they facilitate the transition into the submarine set, which I'll talk about in a bit. So the uniform for the Explorer crew was a really unique challenge for this piece. I did a lot of research into military uniforms of the era, but I didn't want it to feel explicitly militaristic because it really isn't a military venture. It's a private exploration. So I also looked at what people wore on sea voyages and even on safari. I wanted the uniforms to be reminiscent of these and to have a very period appropriate shape, but still feel unique and capture that science fiction vibe that I love so much in this show. It clicked for me when I found these British and New Zealand flight suits. This sideways closure that goes up one side feels very accurately science fiction to me. And this jumpsuit has a wide range of ways that it can be worn. So you can unbutton it, you can tie it around your waist, and you can bring in a bit of character with the accessories and how it's being worn. So I went with a wax linen rather than the heavy lined canvas of the flight suits because you wouldn't need that much thermal protection. And I wanted it to be kind of a lighter garment that would work for when they're exploring later. I also really wanted to highlight the leather gear that was so beautiful at the time. All of this sort of exploring gear is made out of this beautiful leather. So I brought in cobalt blue for the leather goods. The blue, says seafaring to me, but it also brings it away from military because that's obviously a very unusual color for leather goods. So I wanted all the characters to be cohesive, but they still needed to show character differences. And I wanted all of the main characters in this crew to have something different that they wore that still felt like it could have fit in this uniform. So what I did is I basically designed a lot of different pieces that would be part of the standard uniform that could be worn in different combinations. And they all have repeated elements so that they feel cohesive. So some of the touchstones that I pulled out were jodhpurs with a fall front like sailors would have worn. The jodhpurs and the overalls also allow the women in the crew to wear pants in a historically acceptable way. I didn't want my women in dresses or skirts because there's so much movement in this piece. And also because I think that it feels more science fiction for them to be in pants. I also repeated the element of this side closure from the flight suit and brought it into the uniform shirts and jackets. And as well, I brought in angled pockets, lots of jog specific gear, and then everything buckles or buttons. There's no other closures. I also came up with an insignia and ranking system, which is signified by the number of stripes on the collar and the sleeve. So Milo's costume for the rest of the show, really, but starting in the submarine journey, has the uniform elements of the jodhpurs that he pulls on, but it still has some of his studious nature with this cable knit sweater. I was really inspired by these sweaters that I found from the era that are cable knit until the mid chest, and then they're plain knit below. And I found them a lot in photos of flight uniforms and also seafaring men, sailors. And I love that as a detail, so I incorporated that for him. He also always has his journal with him with maps and notes about the journey, and in his pockets, he's able to keep his writing gear. Rourke is the commander of the expedition and is the villain of our story. So he should feel the most militaristic. So I have him in a more classically inspired commander uniform. It's very buttoned up, and I brought in even more of the blues so that he stands out compared to the background crew. His left arm insignia has 3 stripes there and on his sleeve and his collar to show that he is the most in charge. Later in the show, also, he gets sort of power hungry and more villainous. And when that happens, he removes his jacket and he has this sort of tough guy look with the white A-frame tank underneath. Helga Sinclair, the glamorous woman from before, is the second in command and a kick-ass pilot. I have her in these really sharp jodhpurs and a jacket whose shape was inspired by pilots' jackets of the era, but is a bit more cropped to show off her figure since she's really supposed to be this femme fatale character. As the show goes on, she becomes sort of less buttoned up and gets a bit unhinged. So I wanted to make sure that she had pieces that she could lose and could get rumpled up and disheveled to show that character trajectory. Dr. Sweet is the medical officer on board. He is a very kind and very charismatic man who's always prepared for whatever is thrown at him. And he was a medical officer for the Rough Riders in America. So I wanted to bring in this detail of a more Western hat for him, which I think is a fun addition to his silhouette and would add even more emphasis to his stature since he's incredibly tall. He's wearing the uniform shirt that I designed with the side closure, and that's in a chambray to bring the blue in again. Audrey Ramirez is the spunky young mechanic / engineer for the expedition. She's only 17, but she's very no nonsense and she's extremely capable. I was inspired for her by the real life women engineers who were thrown into service at this era. So I had her take the uniform overalls I designed and belt them, just as the woman in this time would have done. There weren't really work clothes for women available at the beginning of the First World War. So they just took the men's garments, threw them on, tied them up, belted them up, and went to work. And I brought in a striped denim for the overalls just to add a little bit of texture for her. And I also gave her this sassy little cap that I loved from the research. Vinny Santorini is the bombs expert on the expedition. He is a tough guy, but he has a heart of gold, and inside he's a big softie. So for his costume, I really wanted him to have this feeling of being armored and padded up. So I started my research with World War I bomb disposal units, but I actually ended up expanding my research to include divers and also flight chest plates from the era. I also looked at football uniforms from the 1910s, which had this amazing quilted leather padding, which I added to his trousers and also to the sleeves of his sweater. Mole was the biggest character challenge for me in this show. He is the excavations expert on the crew and is a very weird little man who is obsessed with dirt, but is unsettlingly brilliant as well. I had his tunneling gear and a series of magnifying glasses strapped to his goggles so that he can analyze a sample at a moment's notice. But it also reads a little bit silly, which I felt like was very important for him. I also found this incredible overcoat from the 1910s, which brings in the slanted closure from the crew uniform, but flips it down to add bulk at the waist. And it also repeats the sort of square buttoned up detail, repeats the detail from Vinny's chest plate. His coat is also a darker color than the others because he would always just be completely filthy and covered in dirt. Cookie is the chef for the crew and is a full-on hillbilly who thinks beans are a food group. I found this incredible photograph at the bottom of an ice delivery man from 1912, and I felt that his attitude was perfect for this character. And I also loved how beat up his jumpsuit is. So Cookie's striped denim apron would be absolutely covered in grease stains by the end of the show. And, he keeps cigarettes in his hat band as well. Wilhelmina Packard is our last crew member. I know there's a lot of them. She is the communications officer on board. So she is a thrice divorced old gossip and is really one of my favorite characters in the film. She keeps her radio on her at all time, and she's just jabbering gossip into the mic the whole show. I wanted her in a version of the crew jumpsuit since she doesn't have any additional rank. But since she's older, she's modified the base to be more of a culotte, like this amazing split skirt that I found from the era. So she has a little bit more of a dated silhouette than the rest of them because she's a little bit older. So as we meet these characters, the ship crew facilitates the transition from the museum set into the submarine. The metalwork of the archway telescopes out to create this orb shape, which encloses the crew. A crew member grabs the ship's wheel from the museum specimen wall and attaches it to the podium that's risen up from the stage. The glass from the museum wall raises up, and the specimens themselves come to life and swim past as blue light rises from the stage and becomes more intense as the ship sinks beneath the waves. Milo describes the journey ahead, and the crew gets to know each other until suddenly, alarms blare, lights flash, and down from the ceiling of the theater comes our first glimpse of Atlanteans, symbolizing the Leviathan attack. This is a trapeze performance, and it marks the end of the act. So it should feel thrilling and exciting, and it's a sneak peek of what to come. And the submarine is attacked, and we end on a cliffhanger. So for these performers, I was very inspired by nudibranch, which are a weird and wonderful sea creature that has unbelievable variety in color and is also bioluminescent. The fringe bits, which would be cast out of a lightweight polyfoam and then painted, would move gorgeously with the movement of the trapeze. They all have also the white hair and tattooing, which is signature to their fellow Atlanteans. That's a through line that you'll notice. And they also have an element of bioluminescence, which is, again, a repeated element throughout. The tips of these fringes would be painted with a UV paint to give a glowing quality underneath the lights. So Act 2 begins, and the crew has found themselves in a cave deep on the seafloor. The metalwork layer from the show portal has lifted, opening up the space so that it feels vast and cavernous compared to the enclosed spaces of the first act. The crew wishes farewell to their fallen comrades and gathers their resources and sets camp for the night. As the campfire burns low, Atlantean scouts come out from the wings and down from the stalactites in a Spanish web act, surrounding the explorers threateningly until it is revealed that they can communicate because Milo can speak Atlantean. So for the warriors, I took inspiration from ceremonial armor, since Atlantis has been isolated for millennia, and all armor that they had would mostly be for show because they have no predators. So I thought, what animal might they take as inspiration for their sort of threatening ceremonial look? And I landed on the peacock mantis shrimp, which may seem like an odd choice, but they have extremely bright, vibrant coloration, which is a common signifier in the natural world of being poisonous. And the shrimp can also punch at the speed of a bullet and have uncommonly strong armor for their size. So I thought that they form a good inspiration for the masks of these sort of sneaky, light on their feet warrior scouts. So upon realizing that Milo can speak Atlantean and that they can communicate, the warriors remove their masks to show that they're in fact human beings, not big shrimp creatures. And their costumes underneath are close fitting to allow for the movement required for the act, but they all have this same asymmetric armor quality that is seen in all of my Atlanteans. Meeting these warriors is a really big moment for the explorers because they didn't expect a living society in the sunken city. They thought they were going on an archaeological expedition. So it's extremely surprising that there's living people in a city that has been underground for thousands and thousands of years. So the leader of this scouting party is Kidagakash, the daughter of the king. She is strong and beautiful and extremely passionate about the livelihood of her culture. She, like all the Atlanteans, is incredibly long-lived and therefore has this long white hair and a beautiful mosaic of tattoos across her body. I was inspired by asymmetric basketry for her chest plate, and I pulled the colors from her skirt from Fighting Fish. And her costume also has a bioluminescent element, which is activated when she binds with the heart of Atlantis later in the show. So fiber optic elements would be woven into her garment, which will glow in combination with the UV painted activated elements. So she has sort of two ways to shine. So the curtains of greenery / stalactite elements raise up, and Kita leads the crew into the city of Atlantis, which is a bustling square filled with activity and life. For the floor treatment, I repeated the mosaic element from the proscenium, as well as the stonework, but I brought in more fluid lines and a color scheme that's inspired by abalone shells. I also loved these Art Nouveau lamps that I found that felt very natural and almost like trees or those like long stalks of seaweed. So I brought those into the square around this goddess figure in the center, which was very much inspired by ancient temples in Vietnam or Cambodia. So Atlantis is filled with the weird and wonderful. And as the explorers enter, they should be completely astounded and delighted. So I wanted to bring in some puppetry elements, because why not? So I was inspired by the supersized animal life in Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth that this is based off of. And I designed these giant hermit crabs, which I think that the Atlanteans use as pack animals or pets. And they would be lumbering across the stage when the explorers enter, just to highlight the fact that we've entered this magical fantasy space. This creature would actually be a performer on quad stilts with a lightweight woven shell encircling them, which I have sort of delineated in the detail drawing in the top corner. For the general shapes of Atlantis, I was inspired by Paul Poiret's fancy dress and Leon Basque's costume renderings, but bringing in the woven and fringe elements and the color and shapes from deep sea creatures that I had mentioned earlier. All the Atlanteans have this beautiful white hair and these tattoos scrolling across their body. And I also wanted to make sure that there was a distinctly non-Western feeling to the way the body was ornamented. So I have repeated elements of the hip dips being exposed while the legs are covered, which is very unusual also for Western dress. I've been jokingly referring to the hip area as my Atlantean cleavage. So merchants also fill the square selling wares. Shakal is one of the merchants and he sells baskets, obviously. I've given him this really gorgeous headpiece, which would be counterbalanced by the large earrings attached to the head wrap. He has the same asymmetric sort of bodice design. They're all unique, but they have the same sort of feeling to them. And his leg coverings have a sea anemone inspired painted textile. There are also street performers like Conti, who do flow arts and surreal acts in this square. So I took the shape of her trousers from the betta fish, and the chest piece would have these woven pieces that are interspersed with sheer pleated elements. The structure of those pleated elements would be similar to an issey miyake pleat, but sheer so that you can see the skin through, which I think has a very aquatic feeling to it. The explorers are also introduced to Kita's friends. So Aetheri is a gossip and a big old flirt. So I put her in a bolder red with this beautiful gossamer fabric wrapped around the heavier woven elements. So I've drawn how the front and back of this top would work, but essentially I want all of these woven elements to feel as if they've been woven and molded directly around the body with no visible closures. They would obviously have closures, but I want them to be very hidden, which is in contrast to the very buttoned, buckled, strapped on sort of elements of the explorers. So Teresh is an Atlantean inventor, and she bonds with Audrey, the mechanic, over the ins and outs of their respective tech. I wanted her look to feel very cool and more streetwear inspired. So I brought in some shibori dyeing in a style and a pattern that is reminiscent of starfish patterning. And she also, her top is a fish leather. And I also brought in this beautiful dripping macrame element, which is something that I repeat with Lukash, the healer. So Lukash is one of Kita's closest friends, but he also cares for the king. As a healer and spiritual advisor, I wanted him to feel grand and a little bit mystical. So I designed this headpiece inspired by deep sea jellies. Lukash tells Kita that the king is not feeling well, and the two of them agree that she has to tell him about these new explorers. So she takes the crew to the throne room. To form the throne room, the goddess statue that forms the center of the market square rotates to reveal the king and his court, and the throne is centered at the heart of this goddess statue. The throne room and the court was all very much more Urtra inspired. So I brought in those elements with the central statue and also with the costumes and grand headpieces, as you will see. So Goris is a royal guard who ushers them into the throne room. They are proud and stately, and for this costume, I was also inspired by the mantis shrimp, but a different varietal with slightly more subdued colors, more quietly powerful. The armor pieces would be a slightly translucent material, like a shell, but would have the same wraparound quality as the woven pieces we saw earlier. They also have these beaded fringe elements to add beautiful movement and drama, and the headpiece is also dripping in these Ertra-inspired beaded strands. Also in Kashikim's court is some of the nobles of Atlantis, including Shetinin, and I wanted them to feel very grand and a little bit holier than thou, so that we got the welcoming people in the market square, but not everybody is welcoming. I was inspired both by Ertra and by ceremonial masks for the shape and scale of this costume, which features a macrame headpiece inspired by the work of Sandra de Groot, who is a beautiful textile artist. She created the white headpiece in this picture. And finally, we have Kashikim, the ruler of Atlantis. He is thousands of years old and incredibly grand and intimidating. I wanted his costume to feel massive and vibrant, but also a bit like a shell that's protecting him because he's very old and frail on the inside. I took his crown from the mantis shrimp paddles that I used for the warrior masks, but I extended the fringe so that it would swing freely. His cloak also features this huge woven front that he would be able to step into. And that is accentuated by this incredibly long beard that trails behind him. So he tells the explorers that they're not welcome in his city and that they have to leave. Rourke talks to him, it says that there are researchers who want to learn about the heart of Atlantis, but he doesn't believe him, rightfully so. And he and Rourke get into an argument, resulting in Rourke attacking him, which divides the explorers. Helga and Rourke want the heart, but the rest of the crew side with the Atlanteans because they didn't expect this to be a living society and they wouldn't survive the heart of Atlantis being taken from because it's powering their city. So that is where we end Act 2. At the beginning of Act 3, Milo wants to know about the heart and is brainstorming with Kita kind of a solution to this conflict that has arisen. So Kita takes him to an old mural which describes the heart's ability to bond with a ruler when under threat. And then the ruler can go and activate the city's defenses. So as she tells him this, it becomes clear that the heart has sensed a threat, and Kita is imbued with power in this beautiful Lyra act that is centered from the front of the proscenium. She comes back down to Earth at the end of this and tells Milo that she must return to the throne room to activate the city's defenses. But before she's able to do so, she is ambushed by Rourke and Helga and kidnapped. Rourke and Helga take Kita back to the volcanic basin, where they have prepared a blimp and intend to set off the volcano in order to escape, which would destroy the city of Atlantis. The blimp is symbolized by the Wheel of Steel, which is a very exciting circus apparatus, which rotates in a daring duo act with Helga and Rourke as Kita attempts to escape. But the Atlantean forces are able to help fight back, and they fly in on trapeze again and help Kita escape, and it's all very exciting. Kita manages to get back to the heart of Atlantis at the center of the goddess statue where the throne is, and she activates the city's defenses against the coming volcanic eruption. The entire city is illuminated with these beautiful scrolling blue lines as the statue comes to life, and we know that the city is saved. So despite their success saving Atlantis, Kashkim did not survive Rourke's attack, and Kita is crowned ruler of Atlantis. I created for her coronation look another exaggerated cloak with this long fringe, but her crown is in the shape of the heart of Atlantis rather than the mantis shrimp because she does not have the warlike tendencies of her father before her. So this is the trajectory of the show scenically. I just wanted to show Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 all together. It's not every single lighting look, but it's the main ones. Here we have all of our folks in the museum in their sepia tones. All of the explorers in their uniforms, their blues and browns, ready to go on a journey. And then these are my Atlantean lead characters and the Atlantean groups that will be performing circus acts. So that's all of the sketches that I did, but I also created paperwork to communicate with various parts. A big part of being a designer is being able to communicate with the people that you're working with. So this is a preliminary hair and makeup board just to show where I got my research, jumping off points, since the hairstyles in Atlantis and the tattooing is so elaborate. I wanted to have a research board to communicate with my hair and makeup team. I also created made to order sheets. This show would have to be entirely built probably at great cost, I imagine. So I created these made to order sheets for the jumpsuits, for Milo's sweater, which would be sent to a custom knit mill, and for the uniform shirts, and also the jodhpurs, Helga's jacket, and Audrey's overalls. Scenically, I also did some detailed drawings of the archway just to explain how that works. So the main archway would be the proscenium opening, which would be painted with this stonework textural detail. And then there is a metalwork layer that's a separate fly, and the mosaic layer is behind that. So those are layered in different amounts to create the different looks throughout the show. I also did a detailed drawing of the floor treatment for the set, and it also gives you a sense of the floor plan of these fluid stepped terraces. And you can see how the goddess statue rotates on this turntable. For the statue, I did a detailed drawing of the front and back of that, and I also modeled it in ZBrush so that I could put it into my 3D Maya model rendering. So here is my Maya model of the throne room scene from a couple different angles. And believe it or not, Maya does not have Kashkim's beautiful cloak available as a figure, so there's just a stand in there, but it's fun. It was fun to be able to see it in through a 3D space. And here is everybody together. So thank you so much for coming to my presentation today. This is a show that I would love to see live. This project pulled from a huge range of passions and has been very much a labor of love in my last year of school. And I'm so happy to have been able to share it with all of you today. Thank you so much.
Devon, this has been, as your thesis chair, this has been an incredible 30 weeks over the 3 quarters, seeing how it evolved, because this project kept moving forwards, back, forward, back, and really evolving. And it's also incredible to see how you're using all the different training that you've received from the scenic design and costume design and merging the two together. I would like to open the floor to your other committee members, to Sarah and Paul. Do you guys have some input? And then we would then go to our, oh, and Deborah Landis is your other committee member as well. So why don't we start with Deborah first? Are you there, Dr. Landis?
I'm here. Hey, I would give you $10 million.
We need that much.
Yeah, it might be, once you get the lighting and, just give her the money to put yeah, it's just, I really enjoyed looking at it. And I have to say, Devon, it was such a pleasure working with you so consistently on this project. I don't remember being with a student, and we have great students, but I don't remember somebody who was took so much advantage of me. Just touching base and making appointments and self-advocating and hitting me up for just to look at the work. What do you think? And considering how great the work is and where you went with it, I really appreciate being part of this process. So I would give you the money, honey, to create the costumes for this. I thought you did just an exquisite job. I do believe that you realized undersea creatures on the stage. I do believe that that's a realization of an underwater world. So I love that part of it. I also think that your vision, which is very much a steampunk vision of that Victorian era, works very, very well for above the sea, the land people. So I really like this steampunk look, and you made it your own. I love the Aran sweaters. There's so much texture in there. Everything is working. You made every part of every costume work. You also created distinct groups for the audience to recognize as they entered, because it's a very busy stage, and I can't really speak to the stage. I'm going to want to hear from Sarah, but there's a lot going on in the stage, and there's a lot going on in the costumes. But I think with the color blocking for the crew especially, and then for your extras being in, you're not extras, for the chorus or the atmosphere being in sepia, I think that creating a block color palette really works for that as well. So you can always ask me questions. Maybe I'll respond when I hear Paul and Sarah afterward. But I think in terms of what you produced and the level of care, artistry, ambition, in the best way, ambitious hard work, I think that you have really, I think you're really ready to graduate. I think you've done a great job. Thank you for including me on this project. Sarah, out to you.
Yeah, it's so satisfying to hear your presentation. And I put this into the chat, but I feel like what's also with costumes that are so conceptual, they're also still so appealing. Like, I'm ready to order your Atlantean Explorer line. It's so fun. And there's something
I
that
need
just
to
feels,
make myself Helga's jacket.
Yeah, there's something that's so like it's so like attractive and accessible. Even as I can, I know what period you're drawing from. That's very clear. And the fantastic, the fantastical elements of Atlantis feel like they tie in really well. I'd also say that you're scenically, even with these really distinct settings, it's like I understand how all the pieces work within the space. And that I think that's really exciting. And I just also wanted to say for the people who didn't necessarily see all parts of Devon's process through these months, I think the thing that has been so impressive to me, Devon, is just your your insistence on continuing to try things. I think that there were many times in this process that you had things that were very successful, and that there were still things that you wanted to keep kind of adjusting and tweaking and experimenting with kind of throughout the process. And I think you ended up at a place that's really exciting and really just gorgeous.
Yeah. And Paul?
I agree with Deborah. You're ready to graduate. That's, and also with Sarah is also bringing up an important, what I would like to say, there's so many things I'd like to say about that, but just because Sarah just mentioned it, you're not done till you're satisfied. And you continually worked and reworked and reworked and one more time reworked again until you really felt yes. And when we first got together and we were talking about that, your concern about the Atlanteans not looking like quote unquote primitive, and I remember that so distinctively. And we talked about the artistic movements, we talked about the multiculturalism, we talked about the importance of rich visual imagery that comes from non-Western sources. And I can certainly tell you, the Atlanteans are not primitive by any means. And in fact, to tell you the truth, from my wheelhouse, which is the costume making, those are the most complicated pieces to produce. And I think as you moved forward, you kept on going, and I kept saying, don't worry, there's a shop somewhere in Canada we can send these to who are so familiar with Cirque du Soleil. They can figure out all of the mechanics and working with the da-da-da-da-da. But I was also impressed when you were figuring out the crew. And I can remember those few weeks where you were working it and working it and working it, and then that light bulb went off. And that's so wonderful to watch someone come to the realization, I have found the world. I have found the look, I have found, and because a uniform is such a statement about these people, but in the same way, each and every one of those people have a variance that makes them distinctive, but yet identifiable as a group. And that is so hard to do with a uniform concept of the submarine crew. And so both above ground and below ground, I have my hat is off to you, Devon. Loved the presentation. You were so, last night when we were talking, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Such a delight to work with you all these years.
Just keep going back to when you have big presentations for other companies, think back about what worked today that was so successful and keep that, in your wheelhouse or your box of tools. Also, we have Professor Lap Chi Chu here. Lap, did you want to add any insight?
Hi. Well, congratulations. I mean, that was quite a complete world is the best way I can put it. But nothing felt like, I wouldn't know what major you were. I don't, except for once you have like very, the detailed costume sheets that it could have been, you could have been a specialist in any one of those things. So that was great to see. And since I only had you in lighting class, I never saw any of that. So congratulations. And yeah, everything is just second in what everybody else says, so Great.
Amazing, amazing. So the rest of our audience, does anybody have things they would like to share? And please feel free to keep adding all these lovely comments, because Devon and Maggie will then save the chat afterwards. Does anybody else? I saw Jane Rum was here.
Hi.
There she is.
I particularly love the 3D rendering of the goddess. I thought that was incredible. That blew my mind. That was so beyond any presentation I've ever seen before. That's fabulous. I loved everything, but that really, I went, whoa.
I think it's because, Jane, that Devon took not only the ZBrush class, but also Maya, which is a 3D, I will get the terminology wrong, but it's also a 3D computer program that is just raising the bar. A lot of our scenic production designers are doing the same, but that sort of changed the whole dynamics, Devon, of where you were going scenically.
I had a big battle for a while because I was so sad that I wasn't going to end up making a physical model, which Sarah saw my debate. All of my advisors and professors, and also my mom, I have really, as has been pointed out, used as jumping off points, as you know, devil's advocate, and I very much have a need to talk my decisions through as I come up with ideas, and I appreciate you all so much for allowing me the space to do that, and encouraging me to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been really an incredible journey, especially with you and your 4 classmates. It's just been a very successful year, and all the projects have been so rich and incredibly well developed, especially being on Zoom. It's incredible what you guys have learned, not only learning how to present on Zoom and deal with that you can't touch fabric anymore, but it's really special, really special. Did anybody else want to add anything? Because then what we'll do is, after those comments, then we can go take a little bit of a break and then let our next presenter set up. But anybody else? Maggie?
Salone's hand is up.
Oh yeah, I can't see on my phone. Yes, can you help me with that? Yeah. Go ahead, Salone.
I'd like to add something too.
Yes, please.
Hi. I just want to add how beautiful it looked, Devon. I've seen you throughout the year work on this, and I cannot emphasize enough how talented you are and how great it was to be studying with you for the last 3 years, and how much you have inspired me throughout this process. Been through the Maya class, seen you do all of this. I have seen the whole thing come to life exactly like everybody says. Cannot wait to see it on stage. It looks beautiful. Congratulations.
I just wanted to add, Devon, and I wanted everybody to hear it because we worked on it for over a year, how much I enjoyed working with you on hair. And it was so much fun, and you did such a great job. I would hire you to rag pick for me in a Tallahassee second. I don't know where you got those clothes, but you are the best shopper next to my mother that I have ever met in my entire life. So you can shop for me anytime. Those pieces from Florida.
Probably.
Oh my goodness. So anyway, just congratulations on hair also. I thought you did a wonderful job, and you just were like, I don't want to go on and on. Sorry about this, everybody, but just so everybody knows what, as Chrissy said, this has been just such a crazy year, and you certainly went through it. And Jeremy's here to back me up. Anyhow,
yes, ditto.
Yeah, not an easy year. Hopefully that'll be the end of that on Zoom.